I never imagined that one simple no could unravel everything I'd spent a lifetime building. That Friday morning, the sun was just beginning to stretch across the kitchen floor, and the smell of fresh mint tea filled the air. I'd just sorted my heart medications into the little weekly pill box when the phone rang. My daughter's name, Melanie, lit up the screen. She rarely called just to chat anymore. I knew what it meant. "Hey, Mom," she said quickly. "Can you watch Lila this weekend? Jason and I have that couples retreat in Vermont. It's just Friday night to Sunday afternoon." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry, but I have a cardiology follow-up Saturday morning. It's nothing urgent, just post-stent. But I've been feeling a little worn down lately. I really need the rest this weekend." There was a beat of silence. Then her voice, once sweet, went sharp. "Wow. I guess you're not being very supportive of the family." I sat back, stunned. For years, I'd rearranged my life at a moment's notice, canceling doctor's appointments, skipping lunch with friends, running across town to pick up Lila early. I made every Halloween costume by hand, kept extra diapers in my pantry, and paid for her preschool when their credit cards were maxed out. I never asked for anything in return. Not even a thank you. I almost reminded her of all of it. The emergency bills I covered, the thousands I gave them for their down payment, the nights I held a colicky baby while Melanie cried herself to sleep. But I didn't, because if one weekend off could make her turn cold, then nothing I said would matter anyway. "I didn't expect this from you," she continued, her voice tight with disappointment. "We really needed you. I don't know what we're going to do now." I swallowed hard. "You and Jason are her parents. You'll figure it out." She hung up, not even an hour later. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up, expecting an apology. Instead, I saw a text. "Please don't come by the house anymore. It's time for some boundaries. We've changed the locks." I read it twice, then a third time, certain I had misread. But the words didn't change. Changed the locks, like I was some kind of intruder. I sat there, the tea now stone cold, staring at the phone like it might explain something. My heart beat fast, not from the stent, but from something deeper. A kind of grief that sat in my chest like a stone. Not for what was lost, but for what I finally realized had never truly been appreciated. And I didn't know it yet. But that was the moment I stopped asking for love I had already given in full. I couldn't stay seated after that message. The words wouldn't stop flashing in my mind like a warning light. "We've changed the locks." It was a phrase that didn't belong in a family text. Not from a daughter to a mother. I needed to see it for myself. Not out of anger, but disbelief. So, I grabbed my purse and my keys and got in the car. The drive was only 18 minutes. I'd done it hundreds of times before: school pickups, birthday parties, last-minute babysitting, but this drive felt heavier. The air felt thicker, the sunlight too bright for the moment. Melanie's neighborhood was the same as always: neatly trimmed lawns, kids' bikes left on sidewalks, American flags drooping slightly in the early summer heat. I pulled up across the street from their colonial-style house, the one with the pale blue shutters I helped them pick out. The same one I co-signed on when the bank wouldn't approve their first mortgage loan. I just sat there in my car, staring at the deep red front door I had painted with Melanie when she was 6 months pregnant with Lila. She had picked the color and laughed that it made the house look grown up. I had laughed with her. It felt like a shared dream back then, something we were building together. But today, the door didn't open when I rang the bell. I stood on that porch longer than I cared to admit. The stroller was still folded beside the bench, and one of Lila's sparkly little sneakers was tucked under the porch swing. I rang again. No answer. I could hear soft footsteps inside, quick, then still. I saw a shadow behind the upstairs curtain shift ever so slightly. Someone was definitely home. I rang one more time, out of habit more than hope, and then reached for the key I had carried for 5 years. The key they gave me just in case. The one that always worked until now. I inserted it into the lock and turned. It jammed. I tried again. Nothing. It didn't fit anymore. They really had changed the locks. That moment wasn't loud. It didn't come with screaming or door slams or tears. It was quiet. A small, final click that said everything. I walked slowly back to my car, like I was carrying something fragile, like if I moved too fast, it would all shatter. I didn't drive off right away. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the steering wheel, as if it might give me some direction. My hands trembled. I couldn't tell if it was grief or rage or both. And then, I did something I didn't expect. I laughed. It wasn't joyful. It was that strange, breathless, edge of hysteria kind of laugh. Because it all felt so absurd. My daughter had cut me off like I was a toxic ex. Not the woman who once rocked her through croup and colic, who stitched every Halloween costume by hand, who stepped in whenever they needed anything, and never asked for anything back. Back home, I didn't bother with lunch. I made tea, but forgot to drink it. I just walked through my quiet little house, like a stranger. Everything was still in place. Lila's crayon drawings still taped to the fridge. Best grandma ever. A crooked heart in red marker. A smiling stick figure that was supposed to be me. The cards. The crafts. The memories. Still here. Still real. And yet, somehow, I felt erased. I opened the hallway closet and pulled down the big yellow folder marked Family Expenses. I hadn't touched it in years. I'm a retired librarian, and I kept records not for leverage, but for the same reason I shelved books alphabetically at home. Order calms me. Inside were pages and pages, bank statements, wire transfers, notes with Melanie's voice in my head echoing, "Just until Jason's bonus clears. It's been a tight month. We don't know what we'd do without you." That last one stuck with me. We don't know what we'd do without you. Apparently, they figured it out. I pulled out receipts. $15,000 for their home's down payment. $4,200 for Lila's birth, when their insurance lapsed. $850 for the stroller Melanie said was the safest on the market. I had the means, I had the heart. So I gave. Again and again. No contracts, no conditions. But now, I was asking myself something I hadn't dared to before. Who takes care of me? The silence in my home was no longer comforting. It felt like a verdict. No one had called to check on me. No one had asked if I was okay, if I had eaten, if I'd cried all afternoon. I had. Not in the loud way, but in that quiet, suffocating way that gets into your lungs and stays there. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even change out of the clothes I wore to run errands that morning. I just sat in my kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from me, the one where Melanie used to sit. Exhausted, venting about life while I poured her tea. The one where Lila giggled with juice boxes and cookie crumbs. Now it sat empty, like a ghost of a life I thought I'd always be part of. At some point around midnight, I stood up, found my old address book, and flipped to R. I hadn't called Alan Rivers, my attorney, in over 6 years, but he'd always treated me like a person, not a sentimental old woman. The next morning, I called his office. "Rivers and McKinley, this is Abby." The receptionist chirped. "Hi, dear. This is Eleanor Davis. I was a client of Mr. Rivers a while back. I'd like to make an appointment with him at his earliest convenience." "Yes, of course, Mrs. Davis. Let me check his schedule." How does Tuesday at 10 sound? Perfect. Thank you. She offered a reminder call. I declined. I didn't need a reminder. I wouldn't forget this. After I hung up, something subtle shifted inside me. Not bitterness, not even grief. Something quieter, more solid, like a piece of myself, had clicked back into place. I wasn't planning to file a lawsuit or show up at their house with a copy of the will. I just wanted clarity, a sense of where my life ended and theirs began. And maybe, for the first time, to draw a boundary of my own. That afternoon, I took out a small framed photo from the living room shelf. It was from Lila's first birthday. Melanie was smiling. Jason was holding the baby, and I was off to the side, half in the frame, half out. I turned the picture face down, not out of anger, but because I needed to see my reflection clearly now, without their shadow on top of it. And for the first time in years, I felt the quiet not as loneliness but as freedom. The day after I made the appointment with Mr. Rivers, I found myself opening drawers I hadn't touched in years. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Not exactly. It started with the file cabinet in the guest room, the one I used to call my little vault. There was a folder labeled Jason Melanie House, with faded ink and an old paperclip rusting at the corner. Inside, I found the equity loan agreement I had signed when they wanted to expand their kitchen and add a nursery before Lila was born. They hadn't qualified for a second mortgage on their own. So, I co-signed. Not co-owned. Just co-signed. All the risk. None of the voice. I sat there holding that document in my lap, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a generous helper. I felt used. Not in the dramatic, daytime television way, but in the quiet, invisible way women like me often are. Slowly, incrementally, with a smile and a thank you, until one day, your kindness is expected, not appreciated. Later that afternoon, I moved to the kitchen and pulled out the envelope labeled Jenna. Medical, gifts, etc. I had saved all of it: thank you cards, email printouts, even handwritten notes on Post-its. I suppose I kept them to remind myself that it all mattered once, that my sacrifices weren't just lost in the shuffle of someone else's busy life. There was a check stub from 12 years ago, $2,000, to help them move when Jason lost his job unexpectedly. Melanie had called me sobbing that day saying, "Mom, I hate this. I hate asking you, but we don't have anyone else to turn to." I had said yes before she even finished the sentence. There were dozens more entries like that. Little financial bridges I built under them when the ground fell away. Emergency dental work, preschool tuition, new tires for their SUV, the water heater that died right before Thanksgiving, each one accompanied by a rushed message. Just this once. We'll make it up to you. You're a lifesaver. I counted 123 transfers over the past 10 years. That didn't include groceries, babysitting, or emotional labor. The hours I spent listening to Melanie vent about her mother-in-law. The evenings I showed up with soup and Pedialyte when Lila had the flu. That was the kind of help I never recorded, because I thought love shouldn't come with a ledger. But maybe it should have come with limits. And that was the crux of it all. For so long, I had believed that love meant sacrifice. That if I kept giving, I'd keep mattering. That if I ever stopped, if I ever said no, I'd become disposable. I didn't realize how close I already was. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with all the receipts spread out like puzzle pieces. I circled each transaction with a red pen. Not out of spite, but remembrance. Each dollar wasn't just money. It was energy. It was time. It was me. When the phone rang later that night, I didn't recognize the number. I answered anyway. "Hi, Mrs. Davis. This is Derek from the Senior Accounts Department at First Hill Bank. I'm calling to confirm the cancellation of your scheduled transfers." I had gone to the bank earlier that day. In person. In my best coat, the navy one I usually reserved for Easter or weddings. I wanted to look like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. The branch manager, a sharp, kind woman named Quinn, didn't flinch when I said, "I want to cancel every outgoing payment to my daughter's household." She didn't ask for drama. She asked for paperwork. That's all I needed. Now Derek was calling to confirm. "Yes, Derek," I replied. "Cancel them all. Effective immediately." There was a pause on the line. "Understood, ma'am. May I ask for the reason? Just for our internal records?" I almost gave him the polite answer. Something vague. Financial restructuring. Family budgeting. But then, I stopped myself. "Because I've decided that my support doesn't need to come at the cost of my dignity," I said. Clearly, he was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "I understand. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Davis." When I hung up, the silence in my house felt different. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. That night, I poured a glass of red wine, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement. I had spent decades being the glue for everyone else, holding things together, quietly, efficiently, and no one noticed the weight I carried until I put it down. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a new notebook and wrote across the first page, "Things I've done that no one saw," and I started listing them. Saturday on hospital benches alone, at 2 a.m., cooked Thanksgiving dinner for 12, washed every dish alone, skipped physical therapy because no one else could pick up Lila, paid for Melanie's dental work quietly so she wouldn't feel embarrassed, bought Christmas gifts when their checking account bounced. Line by line, the page filled with truths that had lived only in my memory until now. And then I flipped the page and started a new list. Things I love that have nothing to do with anyone else. Earl Grey with a splash of cream. Freshly laundered sheets. The sound of rain on the roof at 3 a.m. That little bookstore 2 towns over. Long walks where no one expects me to be anywhere but there. Writing it down felt like reclaiming space inside myself. That afternoon I got a call. It was Jason. His tone was unusually polite. Too polite. "Hi, Eleanor. Just wanted to check in. Melanie mentioned you've been taking some space. We respect that, of course. But, we noticed the grocery transfer didn't come through. Thought it might be a glitch." "No glitch," I said. He was silent for a beat. "Oh. Well, the insurance didn't go through either. I'm from Leo. I stopped all the payments." I replied plainly. Another pause. "Is something going on? Did something happen?" I wanted to scream, "You changed the locks on me." That happened. But instead, I spoke softly. "Melanie made it clear. I'm no longer part of your family. I'm simply honoring that." He shifted his tone, frustration slipping through. "I think you're taking this too personally." "I'm taking this just personally enough," I said. "Goodbye, Jason." I hung up. 10 minutes later, Melanie sent a text. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is causing a lot of stress. Families don't behave like this." I stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down. Not out of spite, but peace. Because what she didn't understand, and maybe never would, was that love isn't supposed to feel like servitude. It's supposed to be a choice, not an obligation. And now, I was finally choosing me. The day after Melanie's text, I woke up with a strange calmness. Not peace exactly, but something close like the stillness. After a storm when everything is quiet, damp, and real. I made myself a bowl of oatmeal, sat by the window, and watched the sparrows pick through the grass. The phone didn't ring. I didn't expect it to. And I didn't reach for it either. I had nothing left to explain. Later that morning, I called my lawyer's office again. Abby answered with her usual upbeat tone. Rivers and McKinley. This is Abby. Hi, dear. It's Eleanor Davis again. I'd like to add a few more items to my meeting with Mr. Rivers tomorrow. Certainly. What would you like to discuss? My power of attorney. I want to revoke it. And I need to make changes to my will. There was a pause just long enough to know she understood. This wasn't a casual adjustment. Of course, Mrs. Davis. I'll note that. We'll see you at 10. Oh. After I hung up, I opened the hall closet and began pulling out old documents, retirement accounts, home insurance policies, life insurance, savings bonds I'd forgotten I even had. I took my time. I was no longer in a rush to help someone else. For once, I was organizing things for me. And then I found it tucked into the back of a plastic folder. A letter from Melanie's husband, Jason, written shortly after Lila was born. A simple thank you card scribbled with a cheap pen. We don't know what we'd do without you. At the time, it had warmed my heart. Now, reading it again, I realized they hadn't meant it literally. They just never imagined what life would be like with boundaries. That evening, I sat on the couch with a glass of water and flipped through a photo album I hadn't touched in years. There we were, Melanie at 8 years old, dressed as a pumpkin for Halloween. Me, younger, holding her hand at the county fair. Lila on the swing in my backyard, hair flying, eyes wild with joy. I didn't cry. I smiled, because for all the pain of the present, those moments were real. They were mine. And nothing, not a lock, not a silence, not a text, could take them away. The next morning, I dressed with care. Soft blue blouse with the pearl buttons, navy slacks, my good flats. I even dabbed on a little lipstick. Not for anyone else, for me. To remember that I mattered. That I wasn't just a background figure in someone else's story. At Mr. Rivers' office, the leather chair squeaked slightly as I sat down across from him. He greeted me with a small nod. Everything's prepared, as requested. Let's start with the power of attorney, I said. I want Melanie removed immediately. He adjusted his glasses, didn't flinch, and pulled out the form. Not a problem. I'll notarize it before you leave. I'd also like to make changes to my will, I continued. Melanie and Jason will no longer be beneficiaries. I want everything placed in a trust for my niece, Claire Linton. He blinked, but only briefly. Understood. Are you certain? Yes, I said firmly. Claire's been good to me not because she had to, but because she wanted to. He nodded again and began drafting language. As we reviewed assets, I listed the house, the checking and savings accounts, the small investment portfolio, and the modest life insurance. Nothing extravagant, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to support someone who didn't treat me like a resource to be tapped until dry. An hour later, as I signed the final pages, a weight slid off my shoulders so gently I didn't realize how long I'd carried it. You've done something brave, Mrs. Davis, Mr. Rivers said quietly as he handed me the final copy of the revocation and the draft of the updated will. It doesn't feel brave, I said. It just feels overdue. When I returned home, I poured another cup of tea and watched the light crawl across the floorboards. The house felt different, no longer quiet in a sorrowful way, but quiet in the way a library does, filled with purpose, even when still. A few hours later, my phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. Hi. This is Derek from First Hill Bank again. I just wanted to confirm that all scheduled transfers to your daughter's account have been permanently canceled. We've also noted the revocation of power of attorney. Thank you, I said. Of course. Is there anything else we can help with? Yes, I said after a pause. I'd like a complete list of every transfer I've made to that household over the last 10 years. Another brief silence. Certainly, ma'am. I'll have that printed and ready for pickup by tomorrow. When I hung up, I sat very still. The hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. Not a sound of loneliness, but of life I had reclaimed. That night, I found myself drawn to the envelope, where I had been keeping little keepsakes, postcards from Claire, crayon drawings from Lila, even a photo booth strip of Melanie and me back when she was in college. I didn't throw them away. I wasn't angry, but I moved them, put them in a folder labeled, Keep Not for Guilt. Then I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote, Family is not who drains you. Family is who fills you back up. And beneath it, saying no is not abandonment. It's survival. The next morning, I walked to the bank to pick up the transaction history Derek had prepared. The branch manager, Miss Quinn, greeted me warmly and handed over a thick stack of pages. Every payment, every transfer, every deposit, she said softly. It's all here. I thanked her and placed the papers gently in my purse. At home, I laid them out on the dining table, line after line of my name amounts that told a story of devotion, of quiet giving. I circled each with my red pen again, not to tally blame, but to honor the effort, to remind myself I wasn't crazy, or selfish, or ungrateful. I was tired. And tired people deserve rest, not punishment. That afternoon, as I was filing the documents away, the phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. It was Melanie. Her voice cracked slightly. Mom, I don't know what you're doing, but you're making things really difficult. Emma won't stop crying. Jason's furious. The mortgage is due, the car insurance didn't go through, and you're acting like this is a game. It's not. It's cruel. Families don't abandon each other. She didn't mention the lock. She didn't mention the text. And she certainly didn't apologize. I didn't call her back. Instead, I pulled out a sheet of stationery and began to write a letter not to send, just to write. Dear Melanie, I hope someday you understand that love and obedience are not the same thing. I raised you to be strong, and maybe you mistook my strength for endless capacity. I said yes so many times not because I didn't have limits, but because I feared losing you. I see now I lost you anyway. Asterisk. So now, I choose myself. I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer labeled, For Me. How? The house felt still again. But this time, the stillness didn't scare me. It honored me. I was done begging to be loved the right way. It was just after 8 a.m. when I heard the knock at the door, a gentle, deliberate knock. Not rushed or demanding. Not the kind of knock that says, I need something, but the kind that says, I thought of you. I wasn't expecting anyone. I had just settled in with my morning coffee, the radio playing a low symphony of birdsong and old jazz. The knock came again. I stood, placing my mug on the counter, and walked slowly to the front door. When I opened it, I saw someone I hadn't laid eyes on in nearly 2 years. Lorraine Baxter. She stood on my front step with a paper bag in one hand and the other tucked into the pocket of her windbreaker. Her smile was tight, uncertain, but her eyes were kind, still the same warm hazel I remembered from our PTA days, from when our girls were in middle school, and we'd trade stories over coffee like we had all the time in the world. I brought cinnamon rolls, she said, lifting the bag slightly. Still warm. Figured you might not be baking much lately. I blinked, not from confusion, but from the sudden realization that I had missed this simple kindness that didn't come with a bill or a guilt trip. Come in, I said. She stepped inside like no time had passed, setting the bag on the kitchen counter, already scanning for coffee mugs out of habit. I watched her move with the confidence of someone who had once belonged here and still did. I heard from Melanie, she said once we were seated. She called. Said you were, well, she said you were having one of your moods. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh. Is that what she's telling people? Lorraine nodded, stirring her coffee with the handle of her spoon like she always did. I told her I'd come check for myself. Told her I didn't believe it. Good, I said, because I'm not having a mood. I'm having a reckoning. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the truth settle in the room. She looked around, her eyes catching on the postcards pinned to the fridge, the notebook on the table, the absence of toys and sticky fingerprints. She said you refuse to help, that you're pulling away, that you're acting out. I sipped my coffee and met her gaze. I said no to watching Lila for one weekend. I had a cardiology appointment. Melanie didn't like that, so she changed the locks. Then she told me not to come by anymore. In a text message. Lorraine didn't blink, didn't gasp, just sat there, the corners of her mouth turning down slightly, as if bracing for impact. And then what? She asked gently. And then, nothing. Just silence. Except when the money stopped coming. Jason called. Then Melanie texted. Not to say sorry, just to say it was cruel. And what did you do? I smiled. A sad kind of smile. I did what I should have done years ago. I revoked the power of attorney. Changed my will. Redirected every dollar I had set aside for them into a trust for Claire. She raised an eyebrow. Claire. Your niece? From Oregon? Yes. She visits. She calls. She doesn't need anything from me except a conversation. There was another silence between us, but this one felt good. Comfortable. The kind of silence that sits like a blanket on a cold morning. You've been carrying them for years, Eleanor, she said finally. They only noticed when you let go. I nodded slowly, letting her words take root. Well, she added, finishing her coffee. Good. About time someone reminded these grown children that love isn't a debit card. I laughed. A real laugh this time. One that reached my ribs and made me press a napkin to my eyes. We didn't talk about Melanie after that, not directly. We talked about books we never finished and recipes that went wrong. We laughed about the time her husband, God rest him, tried to install a ceiling fan upside down. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself I didn't realize I had left behind. Before she left, Lorraine turned at the door. If she comes crawling back, and she might make sure she brings a key. Not just an apology. I stood there in the doorway long after she was gone. The cinnamon rolls still warm on the counter. The coffee pot still half full. The house felt different, lighter. Not because someone had entered, but because someone had understood. Later that afternoon, I wandered into the living room and sat in my armchair. The late-day sun poured through the sheer curtains, painting golden rectangles on the hardwood floor. I picked up my phone, not to check messages, but to clean out old ones. One, from Melanie, caught my eye. I didn't open it. I just stared at it until the screen dimmed and went dark. And then, like something out of a movie, the phone rang again. It was a voicemail, not a call. I didn't recognize the number, but when I listened, the voice on the other end made my heart ache in a way I hadn't expected. Lila. Hi, Grandma. It's me. Mommy's been crying and Daddy's been yelling, and I don't know what's going on, but I miss you. I miss your house and the stories and your cookies and the way you used to tuck me in and say, "Sweet dreams, little bean. Can I come over sometime?" Even if Mommy says no, her voice cracked at the end. She didn't sound 6. She sounded older, wiser, bruised in the way children get when they understand too much and don't know what to do with it. I listened again, and then again. I didn't call her back right away. My heart said yes, of course, but I had learned not to run toward every tug on my soul. I had to sit with it. Instead, I picked up the small yellow notepad I kept by the phone and wrote her name at the top. Lila. Not as a promise, as a beginning. The next day, a letter arrived. A real letter stamp. Envelope. Handwriting on the front. Melanie's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. She always made her capital M's too sharp and her lowercase e's too wide. I held the envelope for a long time. 5 minutes? Maybe more. Then I opened it. 2 pages, blue ink, new greeting. "No, dear Mom." Just the first sentence like a slap. "I hope you realize what you're doing to this family." I kept reading. She wrote that Jason was angry, that Lila was confused, that the timing was terrible. She asked if I was depressed. She suggested therapy. She said my behavior was erratic, that she was concerned. But nowhere in that letter, nowhere in those carefully written lines was there an apology. No mention of the locks, no regret for the text, no acknowledgement of what they had done. The last paragraph sealed it. "We're still willing to include you in our lives, but only if you're willing to be a team player. Families require sacrifice. You taught me that." I folded the letter neatly, twice, and walked it over to the fireplace. I didn't light it. I didn't need to. I just didn't want it on my table anymore. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. The next morning arrived quietly. No alarms, no urgent messages, no knocks at the door. Just the slow, steady hum of life, returning to something simpler, something mine. I poured my coffee and stood by the window as the morning light settled softly on the kitchen floor. I hadn't heard from Melanie since the letter. I hadn't responded. I wasn't planning to. For the first time in years, I felt no pressure to smooth things over or to tiptoe through someone else's emotional minefield. The burden wasn't mine anymore. At noon, I walked to the mailbox. Just catalogs, a local church bulletin, and a postcard from Claire. A view of the Oregon coast, cliffs fading into mist, blue sky streaked with gulls. Her handwriting was cheerful, just messy enough to make it feel sincere. "Aunt Eleanor, thank you for everything. I don't even know what to say, except I hope you'll come visit soon. We'll make scones and sit on the porch and pretend the world makes sense. Love. C." Oh, I pinned it to the fridge beside Lila's old drawing of us baking cookies. Stick figures with giant smiles, and a crooked sun in the corner. I didn't cry. I just stood there for a long moment, taking it in like a deep breath. That afternoon, I tackled the front hall closet, the catch-all that had slowly filled with things no one remembered. Lila's rain boots from 3 winters ago, Jason's old work gloves, a cracked snow globe, unmatched socks, and a tangle of forgotten toys. I sorted everything with quiet resolve. Some I donated, some I threw away. I didn't keep a single thing out of guilt. At the very bottom of the closet, I found a small envelope. Inside, folded carefully, was a crayon drawing from Lila, a purple stick figure house, a bright green lawn, and me in the middle holding her hand. In crooked letters it read, "Me and Grandma's home." I smiled, pressed it flat, and slipped it into a folder labeled Keep, not because I needed Melanie's permission to remember who I was, but because I finally understood I never had. That evening, As the light turned golden across the backyard, I brewed a fresh pot of tea and settled into my rocking chair by the window. The phone buzzed. I didn't flinch. Another message. This one was short. Mom, I don't understand what you're doing. This isn't you. It's cruel. The mortgage is due. The cards are maxed. You've always said family takes care of family. Why stop now? I stared at the screen, then gently set the phone down, face down, on the side table. I picked up my notebook instead and wrote a single sentence, because I finally learned that family isn't just who you take care of, it's who takes care of you. The following morning, I returned to Mr. Rivers' office to finalize everything. He greeted me himself, already holding the folder. No further action needed after this, he said as I sat down. We walked through the final revisions. Claire was now the sole beneficiary of the trust. Melanie and Jason had been removed entirely. No small sums, no tokens, no symbolic gestures. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it for clarity, for peace, for myself. As I signed the last page, Mr. Rivers placed it into a folder with a small nod. You're officially done. Thank you, I said quietly. Truly. He smiled gently. You've done a brave thing, Eleanor. It doesn't feel brave, I replied. It just feels like I've stopped waiting for someone to see me. Outside, the breeze had picked up. Summer clouds rolled in over the trees, carrying the scent of earth and something clean. I didn't go straight home. I drove to the train station and bought a ticket. One way. Midweek departure. Destination. Oregon coast. Claire had extended the offer more than once over the years. Come visit, come stay. You can have the guest room, the garden, the mornings to yourself. And I had always said, maybe after Lila's birthday, or after Jason's work trip, or once things calmed down. But things never did. Not for long. There was always another need, another favor, another invisible leash tied to my ankle. Now, there were no excuses. When I returned home, I started packing. Slowly, thoughtfully. A few sweaters, a pair of comfortable walking shoes, my notebooks, and 2 of my favorite novels. In the back of my closet, I found the blue scarf Melanie had given me 5 Christmases ago, still folded neatly in tissue paper. It was soft. It was beautiful. But it wasn't warm. I placed it gently in the donation bag, along with a few other trinkets I had once kept out of habit, not sentiment. Then I called the women's shelter and arranged a pickup. I didn't need keepsakes anymore. I needed room. That evening I stood in my bedroom, taking in the space I had reclaimed. The walls were quiet. The drawers were orderly. It felt less like a house and more like a home mine. I left a note for my neighbor, Miss Hanson, letting her know I'd be away for a while. Asked her to water the rosemary and take in the mail. I didn't give an end date. The morning of my departure, I brewed coffee, watched the light stretch across the floorboards, and stepped into the day with a quiet sense of purpose. At the station, I boarded early and chose a window seat. The train pulled away gently, the city fading behind me like a story I had finally finished reading. Halfway through the trip, my phone buzzed again. One new message. This time it was from Melanie. I heard about the trust. Claire, really? I can't believe you'd leave everything to someone you barely see, after everything we've done for you. You've made your choice. I hope it keeps you warm. I read it once. Then I deleted it. No response. No rage. No explanation. End. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Across the aisle, A little boy leaned against his mother's shoulder, humming softly while she ran her fingers through his hair. She said nothing, just smiled gently at him as the train rocked back and forth. I watched them for a long time, not with jealousy, not with sadness, just with understanding. 3 hours later, the train pulled into a small, misty station, nestled between coastal trees and fog. There she was, Claire standing on the platform, waving both arms like a child greeting Santa. As I stepped down, she wrapped me in a hug that didn't ask for anything, didn't demand forgiveness, didn't come with terms. "You look taller," she said, grinning. "I feel it," I replied. She laughed. "Come on. I made scones. And there's a chair on the porch with your name on it." We drove with the windows down, the salty air tangling through my hair. Her house sat on a bluff, just high enough to hear the waves, and just far enough to forget the rest of the world. Books on every shelf, blankets folded neatly on the couch. A cat named Percy asleep on the window seat, like he owned the place. Claire didn't show me to the guest room. She just said, "Set your bag wherever feels right." That evening, we sat on the porch with warm scones and cinnamon tea, watching the sea shift under a lavender sky. Claire didn't ask for my story. She waited until I was ready. And when I was, I told her everything. The locks, the silence, the years I mistook sacrifice for love, the way I finally learned to say no and mean it. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer platitudes. She just held my hand and said, "I think you did something women in this family were never taught to do. You chose yourself." I nodded slowly. "It only took me 74 years. Claire smiled. "Still faster than most." And we sat there together until the stars blinked into place, quiet, strong, and finally whole. The first few days at Claire's house passed like something out of a quiet novel. Long mornings, with the smell of coffee and salt air, soft music playing from a speaker in the corner, and the sound of the ocean folding in and out like breath. I slept better than I had in months. Not because my problems had disappeared, but because I'd finally stopped inviting them into bed with me. Claire had her own rhythm, working from her sunroom in the afternoons, tending her little garden in the mornings, talking to her cat Percy, like he was a roommate with opinions. She didn't hover. She didn't question. She just let me be, and I didn't realize how much I needed that until I had it. We went for walks down the gravel path that led to the shoreline. My knees complained, but I took my time. Claire slowed for me, never made a fuss about it. She let me lean on her arm when the stones were loose and the slope too steep. And when we reached the water's edge, we stood together in the surf, shoes in hand, the cold biting at our ankles. "This," I said, "feels honest." Claire didn't say anything. She just nodded and reached for my hand. That afternoon, we baked a peach cobbler. I hadn't baked for pleasure in years. It had always been for birthdays, holidays, or when someone needed something. This time it was just for us. Claire made the crust while I sliced the fruit. We listened to an old folk playlist and argued gently about whether cats could recognize their names. By the time the cobbler came out of the oven, the house smelled like cinnamon and comfort. We sat on the porch again that evening, watching the sky shift from blue to gold to a soft slate gray. Percy jumped into my lap and curled into a warm, familiar lump. I stroked his fur and said, "I could get used to this." Claire smiled. "I was hoping you would." The moment felt whole, until my phone buzzed again. I hadn't been checking it much. I'd turned off most notifications, but this one slipped through. "Melania." The message was different this time. "Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I want to, but everything feels broken. Lila won't stop asking about you. She cries at bedtime. Jason doesn't understand why I'm not angrier, but I don't know. I think I miss you." I stared at the screen, unsure whether to feel moved or manipulated. Claire noticed my silence. From her? I nodded. She says she misses me. Claire didn't rush me. Do you believe her? I thought for a long moment. I think she misses what I gave her. Is that the same thing? Neither of us answered. Not yet. Instead, I set the phone down on the porch railing and leaned back in my chair. The sky was deepening now, the stars beginning to reveal themselves. Slowly, shyly. I spent the next few days walking, writing, and breathing. I opened one of my favorite notebooks and started a new list. Things I know for sure. At the top, I wrote, 1. People will take what you give until you stop giving. 2. Saying no doesn't make you unkind. 3. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. 4. I am still whole, even if I'm not needed. 5. Lila deserves better models of love than guilt. One morning, Claire handed me a small box. What's this? I asked. A key, she said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. To this house, just in case you ever want to come back, or never leave. Inside was a simple brass key tied with a ribbon. I didn't cry, but I did hold it like it meant something sacred, because it did. That afternoon, I packed a small overnight bag. Not because I was leaving permanently, but because I felt ready to visit home, to walk through my garden, to sit in my own chair, to see if my house still felt like mine. Claire drove me to the station. She didn't ask when I'd return. She just squeezed my hand and said, "Text me when you get in. I'll keep the porch light on, just in case." Back in my house, everything was as I left it. Still, clean, waiting, but not needy. I watered the rosemary bush. I opened the windows. I made a pot of chamomile tea and sat on the back steps while the sun slid low behind the neighbor's garage. Then, a knock at the door. Not Melania. Lila. She stood on the step, backpack crooked on one shoulder, a folded piece of paper clutched in her small hand. Her hair was longer, her face rounder, but those eyes, I would have recognized them in any crowd. "Mommy dropped me off," she said. "She said I could stay the weekend, if that's okay." I didn't speak. I just stepped aside. "Come in." She kicked off her sneakers by the rug like she had done 100 times before and ran straight to the fridge. "You kept it," she shouted, pointing to the postcard from Claire. "Of course I did," I said, closing the door behind her. That evening, she curled up next to me on the couch, hot cocoa in hand, the old patchwork blanket wrapped around her legs. We didn't talk about Melanie. We didn't talk about the locks or the silence. We just read her favorite storybook, the one with the fox and the moonlight and the line she used to whisper along with me. "Home is where someone waits for you." I kissed her forehead, and I'm always here. And in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. I hadn't abandoned her. I had stopped abandoning myself. The next morning, she helped me pick tomatoes from the garden. We sat on the back porch eating them like apples. Her laughter, bright and unfiltered, echoed against the fence. It felt like coming home. But not to the house. To myself. Later that day, I checked my phone. Nothing new from Melanie. But that was okay. I had stopped measuring my worth by the frequency of her outreach. Instead, I opened a new page in my notebook and wrote, "Love is not a currency to be spent until empty. Love is a light, and I still have mine." A week later, after Lila's visit, the house was quiet again, but this time, it didn't ache. Her laughter still echoed softly in the corners, and her crayon drawing a new one with a giant sun and the words, "I love Grandma's house," was proudly taped to the refrigerator. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was proof that love could survive, even grow, when planted in truth. I found myself smiling more. Not the polite kind, not the automatic kind, real, warm smiles that rose up from somewhere inside me I hadn't visited in years. Melanie never followed up after dropping Lila off. No calls, no texts, no apology. But she also didn't try to stop her daughter from coming back. And that, strangely, was enough for now. I wasn't waiting for reconciliation anymore. I wasn't waiting for her to explain, to regret, or to change. I had released her from that responsibility. And, more importantly, I had released myself from the expectation. One morning, I stood at the window watching the leaves begin to shift to their autumn colors. The air smelled like the start of something new. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest. I brewed a cup of coffee and returned to the porch with my favorite shawl, the one Claire gave me years ago. It was soft and worn and perfect. I took out my notebook one last time and wrote at the bottom of the last page, "Goodbye isn't always sad. Sometimes it's freedom." And with that, I closed it. Not because the story was over, but because I was finally living the part that didn't need to be written down. Life has taught me, sometimes painfully, that love without boundaries turns into servitude, and sacrifice without recognition slowly hollows you out. For years, I believed being a good mother meant saying yes, even when it hurt, even when I was tired, even when no one noticed. I gave quietly, constantly, until my silence became their expectation. But when I finally said no, they treated me like I was disposable. That moment, as hard as it was, became my awakening. I learned that self-respect isn't selfish. Saying no isn't cruelty, it's clarity. I had to lose the illusion of unconditional acceptance to find the truth. That real love doesn't demand you erase yourself. I don't regret helping my family, but I do regret waiting so long to help myself. Today, I know that being needed is not the same as being valued. And I choose value. I choose peace. I choose to teach my granddaughter through action that women don't have to set themselves on fire to keep others warm. If there's one message I could pass on, it's this: love fiercely, but not at the expense of your soul. Because in the end, you deserve the same care you so freely give to others.